from the endpoint, and I'll talk about some kind of real-world experiences, because I think it's always fun when a new market space is versioning, we're finding out what can be done with it and what's really working, what's not working. To me, that actually becomes more valuable than coming and kind of talking about all the pie-in-the-sky ivory tower theories and concepts behind it. All right, so when I first started with Nexthink, I'm going to start with this little piece here because I think it helps really start where the space came from. We're a small Swiss company, came over to the US, we're just getting established, and this is kind of where I'll leave it. They had actually classified us as inventory on steroids. And when we were going around and talking to different analysts, different parts of the organization, like, you're really not that. And neither are all these other people out there. Splunk really doesn't just do security. And they were like, you know what? BMC has some things that analyzes large amounts of data or help desk reports, things like that. And as they started talking about it, we started working with the analysts, they came up with this idea of IT operations analytics. Now that's Ray's version. I'm pretty sure it's close to the truth, but you know, there's a lot of vendors now. And if you want to kind of take a look and understand a little bit more about IT operational analytics, you can go to the ITOA landscape. But no, that's being supported by Forrester and Gartner. And it's really this whole idea that we can take a lot of information to help IT start to really understand things like disruptions, understand how they can better affect productivity, inefficiencies within their infrastructures, their applications, whatever it might be able to understand when failures are going to happen. And hopefully, kind of the idea behind this is we take all this information, we take it in from the MSPs, maybe we've got cloud service providers, right? We take information in from security, our security solutions, our IT service desk, lines of business applications. The idea behind IT operation analytics is to put this all together to be able to start trending and hopefully start predicting how we can better support our businesses with the different services that we offer. Does that kind of make sense? So if you can imagine, I've got logs coming in, I've got security events coming in, I've got so much information right now, it looks like a tremendous amount of noise. So what we're going to try to talk about here is how can we reduce that noise and actually find different patterns, find different bits of information that are useful to bubble that to the top. So I've kind of used this a couple of times. I'm not sure how I always feel about it, but I think it does a pretty good job. What I try to represent here is a little bit of a maturity model. You see across the top, and you're kind of familiar with ITIL. There's a couple of ITIL processes kind of labeled up there. They're not 100%. It's not meant to be 100%. But what we're really talking about here when we're looking at this, right, is this idea that we ultimately design a service, and we have to take into consideration the people, the things that they're using, the processes, the way management is affecting them, and overall business. Then we've got to transition that service. We've got to continue to maintain it and move it. And we've got to hand it off to IT operations. Those are kind of pretty close, but when we talk about IT operations here, we're going to really talk about is the end result. In service transition, what we really talk about is things like management, patch management, and different processes being rolled out. So has anybody been part of a project where someone has come to you and said, hey, I need this information from you. I don't care what it was. I don't care if it's help desk reports, you're looking at number of tickets, router logs, I need to understand what's going on with my routers. Or if it's the combination of things, man, maybe I look at my support desk tickets, then I got to go find out what's going on with my router log. Wait a minute, the date and timestamp don't look the same, right? So now I've got this data over here, that data over here. I've constantly got to move in the environment. And this is kind of the idea of where we are right now, right? We've got all of this different data coming in from different places, and we're trying to make the best guesses that we can. Now, if you think about that, we kind of fall through the filter here of the actual people we're trying to serve, kind of our customers, right? Down through the process of managing and ultimately up to the business. If we're taking all that information and it's not coming in a way where we can really understand or know what to do with it, or it's changing too fast, those types of things, how can we best empower the decision that our managers and our business are ultimately making? And so for me, this is what I really try to, discuss with people. I mean, it's always really about empowering the business, right? We want to be able to show return. We want to be able to ultimately affect productivity. We want to be able to go in there and show them what can be done. And in the current model with distributed inconsistent data, it's very difficult to do that. So when we start taking a look at what we can do with service transitions. So I went through, I gathered all this data, it didn't make sense, I'm going to hand it off and say, now go make a change. Okay, so this guy's going to go make a change, and that change could be a process change, it could be change to the time and date that we roll patches out, it could be a change to the way that we manage service desk calls. Maybe we're rolling out, it doesn't matter, it's kind of the point here, right? We use data to identify a theory. We're going to take that theory and we're going to roll that through some sort of transition, and we're going to hope that it works out well. But again, if we didn't start out with something good and clean, how are we going to ultimately get to the point where we have made a good change? And this to me is kind of where the powerful part of this comes in. When it's rolled out into operations, if we've done this right, then what we have is we can move from unexpected issues and challenges, reactive and ad hoc exceptions, and poor communications handed down to the business, right, to a proactive environment where everybody's on the same page. So what I did is try to draw a picture there of kind of what a typical day in life is. And now what I want to do is kind of transition a little bit more into IT operational analytics. So if I take the same model, instead say, if we put a framework in place to actually analyze how our IT operations are performing, how our service desk is performing, how are we matching our SLAs, how are our routers, our applications, our routers, our PCs, our applications, all the way on up the stack, how are they all performing? And we've laid a template over the top of this, so we're always on the same page, looking at the same data set, and ultimately taking big data approaches to all of this. Kind of an interesting theme I always think of. Are we all familiar with business intelligence and the idea behind business intelligence? So, right, it's kind of the same idea, BI for IT, basically, right? The problem is, when they went and took a look at the BI vendors and said, let's aggregate this data at the top, they didn't have the right framework to pull different data sets. So now what you do is you see all these vendors coming out saying, we can manage all of these different types of data sets, so we're going to roll this out. This is where you're starting to see the space come into play. And the idea is, instead of living in the situation where we have inaccurate views for our stakeholders, now we present them with the standard, good, accepted view. Has anyone sat in meetings and argued just over the numbers? Someone throws a spreadsheet up there and it's like, I don't know how you drew that deduction. That makes no sense to me. Like, how can it not make sense to you? All I did is use the same numbers that you use. Those aren't the numbers I use. This type of conversation can go on for 20 minutes, right? And it's a really good point, because if you're in this meeting, if you're in the meeting with a business stakeholder versus with management, that becomes really important. The second someone undermines those numbers, it's like, wait a minute, do we all have our ducks in a row? So I don't know if this is experience you can relate to, but it's the same thing for IT. Okay, we put them on the same page. Now, when we've made our understanding of what, or we've started with good core numbers, good core data, we've all agreed on what it's supposed to look like. We move into this area here, right? Instead of being poorly designed, we're all on the same page. We've accepted the tolerances that we need, and now we've actually designed something we all agree upon. And when we roll it out, now we know what to expect based on the previous histories. Does that make sense? Any questions? Because I just gave you a very ivory tower of what it's supposed to be. I mean, it would be nice if we could just drop a piece of technology in there and go like, that's all fixed, right? Kind of make sense? Yeah. All right, so I want to take the same concept, and I want to really talk about kind of a missing link. So what this really represents, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and do the next little animation here. What this represents is the way information and data in IT is typically working right now. This represents 90% of the organizations I talk to. And they're all in some state of flux of maturity, right? Maturity of, oh, yes, we have some sort of analytics in place. We don't have analytics in place. It doesn't matter. The same core usually exists. And that is, we have IT services of some sort. This concept that IT is there to deliver services so the business can be productive. Right? Plain and simple. Certain services go down, business loses money. Supporting services go down, business loses money. Right? So this whole idea is, we have invested a tremendous amount of money. Does anybody not have a server monitoring system in place? Does anyone, got your hand up. Got around the corner back. Does anybody not have routers or some sort of security system in place? We've invested a ton of money back here, and this is really kind of an interesting concept to me, because I never thought about it to kind of step back and give you a little history, my background is most deeply rooted in security years and years and years ago. I started out in security and got to do all these different types of, was part of cyber attack teams, forensics teams. I really enjoyed that world a lot. In fact, I almost wish I never left that little tiny area. But ultimately, what it really did is familiarize me with lots of laws, concepts, and rules and best practices. And what I thought was real interesting is you do what you're supposed to. You invest a lot of money to protect these assets back here and make sure that they're working. What's most interesting is all of this work is done so it can be delivered to the IT consumer. So this is any of your users, right? Their job is to be productive for the business and make money. And yet, the only 90% of the feedback loops are simply support calls and help desk tickets. So think about that, right? Everything you're supposed to deliver, and I've come up with different metaphors for this in different rooms, right? Different little tricks to kind of show an example. But if you can imagine, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to take a ball and I'm just going to throw it over my shoulder. And that's a service, right? And you guys are going to turn around the opposite direction, right? And try to catch the ball. But the only way you can tell me whether or not I threw the ball the right place or not is by calling me on the phone and saying, yeah, a little bit more to the left, a little bit more to the right. You see what I'm saying? So without having the right insight into what's going on with your end user infrastructure, it's very difficult to really understand if all those decisions we were making back up here really were effective unless they show up in some number somewhere, right? Somebody ultimately runs a report and says, yeah, 2% increase somewhere, right? And when we get to that point, then, like, success, yay. But we don't really understand whether or not we made a difference or what we can attribute that for. And so one of the things I like to really push, and it's one of the things that we talk about a lot, is making sure in your IT operation and analytics solution, you're pulling this data in from the end users. There's absolutely no reason I can't have logs about application performance, hardware, software performance, network performance, any type of performance about what's going on out there on those endpoints. I know that's me. Go ahead and turn around. Okay, so when we start taking a look at what we can do with this, when we've actually put this whole system together, right, what it allows us to do is take that back-end information, all those reports, all those things that we're doing, that end user information, and it gives us an immediate view of everything going on in the infrastructure. Now, I've turned around, you've turned around, we're all in the same room, it's much easier just to pass the ball back and forth, right? So this is the idea behind this. When we start taking a look at analytics, it's not always just about things like productivity. It's things, quality. How are the end users experiencing this? What I think is real interesting, I'll go back to this visualization one more time. I don't know, how many of your organizations are adopting some sort of cloud service? Okay, as soon as you adopt the cloud service, how much of this do you have in place anymore? In fact, I would say in the last 6 or 8 months, here's what a lot of my on-sites have been like. In fact, I was working with a medical organization just recently, and I won't use the name of the app. And they call me up and they say, Dan, this thing is just not working. And they're like, can you help us figure out why it's not working? I'm like, well, you have an APM tool in place. Oh, yeah, I have tons of APM tools in place. I'm like, well, I just throw it on there. Oh, I gotta tell you, it's out in the cloud. Right? So now, all of a sudden, since this tie has been cut, they have no idea what's going on, how to go back to that provider. So, say they missed SLAs. Say all of a sudden the guy's like, actually, no, I don't think that you guys met your SLAs. I don't think you guys are actually had the uptime you said you had, or the response time that you said you're going to have, right? What does the customer have to go back to that with? I mean, they really, I've had seen 2 or 3 customers that are just extremely frustrated. In fact, it was really neat rooms. We're sitting in a kind of room like this, but smaller, and they painted the walls like this greenish gray. I mean, we were in there for 2 or 3 hours, and by the time we're done, I'm like, guys, I'm just depressed. Not only is your world falling apart, but this room's killing me. But anyway, when we got done, we talked about actually rolling out and bringing in this consumer information and the importance that this consumer information could bring. Because now I can see from their perspective what's happening. So again, I didn't mean to take that segue so long. The idea is on that medical organization, right, I can actually go back to them now and tell them, you know what? Those PCs, none of them had CPU problems. None of them were having issues, with other network transactions and things going on. The only component that's common amongst all of this is your application. Oh, and by the way, this was happening, right? So while it didn't give them the full kit and caboodle to go back, it did give them the information they need to make decisions about their vendor, right? Again, you roll that back up to the business. Now when the business goes to actually renew it, they can say, you're causing us these kind of problems. So we see IT operations analytics applied to quality, productivity, risk, and security. I won't go down these things too long or too far. And really the ultimate goal, again, ivory towers, is to start rolling up KPI, cost management frameworks, right, and then ultimately improve end user satisfaction and productivity. Does that make sense? Have I drawn an okay picture for you so far? So if we put an IT operation analytics framework in place, this is some of the returns that we're seeing out there. Now, I'll go ahead and qualify this. This right here was actually with one of our counterparts with Brian's counterpart, right? So we went through and actually went and talked to a bunch of customers. So this wasn't just an exercise in marketing. I've always been in technical sales, and one of the hardest things for us to do in technical sales is live up to marketing expectations, right? And so we decided when we were doing some work here that we needed to go talk to the actual customers and just see what was kind of going on. We had to do this as an exercise for our organization anyway. And what we really wanted to do is see what kind of return people were getting within their first year. So we focused on a particular segment, and that kind of an SMB segment, you could think 5 to 10,000 PCs. Okay. And so what we were seeing is by putting in place and determining what's going on, or putting in place an IT operation analytics framework, we were able to see different types of return, particularly around, really the ones that tend to resonate the most are the cost avoidance with hardware utilization, well, what else ultimately called vendor management, right? The ability to go back to a vendor and say, we're buying more, we're not buying more, we need this, we don't need that, and actually having real data to back it up, objective data to back it up. We also see major improvements around performance and quality of service. And where I want to get to is probably the one that's most important to you. And that's proactive IT right here. Increased visibility into issues. So as we start looking at that, what we've noticed is a lot of change. I'm sure, so how many of you guys have a formal problem management process? And in that problem management process, do you just have a centralized place, a bulletin board of some sort, or an announcement service that lets people know when there's a major issue? You guys do? Okay, very nice. One of the things that we did is we integrated those types of systems with some IT operation management systems. And what that started to do was we started to actually be able to announce issues before calls even started coming into help desk. And this is where I'll start talking about a couple of real-world experiences, and we'll kind of wrap this up and roll a couple more slides. I'm going to talk about two this time, and I think two important ones. One was, again, I was on site with the customer. They were having, actually, we were doing a proof of concept. And when we were doing the proof of concept, there was a guy sitting over here, and he was taking some, I think he was a level 2 support guy, he was taking phone calls. And 2 calls came in saying there was problems with Outlook, not Outlook, the Microsoft Exchange or email system. Okay, and so he reaches out and he calls the network guys. Again, this is kind of the point of not being on the same data set. He calls the network guys and says, network guys, hey man, is there a problem with the network? Because a lot of people are all of a sudden reporting problems. Like, nope, must be the server guys. Get on the phone, the server guy says, nope, it's not my problem. I looked at my dashboard and they're all green. Okay, so what we did is we went back to our IT operation analytics and some of the visualizations in there and took a look at it. And what we could see was it wasn't a problem at just one location. That kind of removed the network. It wasn't a problem across a single version of an application. That kind of removes the application. But it was a problem happening at 2 servers. So at this point, when I say those 3 things, what's kind of your first thought of the problems? It's just happening with 2 servers. Their guess was the server guy doesn't know what he's talking about. So we reach out to the server guy, and the server guy swears up and down And all of a sudden, we've got the little, the little war room thing going on over here. We got everybody on the phone, everyone's trying to figure it out as fast as they can, and I'm really having to perform my job at that point in time and show them just how well IT operation analytics works. And I look at it and I go, well, has there been any changes in the environment? And actually, the network guy speaks up and goes, yeah, we upgraded our switches over the weekend. And long story short, what had happened was they upgraded their switches over the weekend. Whoever did it hadn't loaded hadn't the configuration right, and it defaulted back to an old configuration. And what was happening is everything but voice traffic was getting dropped. Right? So, well, there was some tolerances in there, so there's a couple of connections we're going through. The point was, without this big, huge view of what was going on, no one would ever know what was going on. Or no one would, it would take much longer for them to get down to the real true problem. Now, we didn't use IT operation analytics to root cause it. What we did is we used it to uncover it, right? Actually, it's kind of like more like a metal detector, or you kind of go walk around and go, that's kind of where it's at, guys. It's your choice if you want to dig for it and figure out what to do with it, but that's where the issue was. So that's one use case. It's kind of a technical use case, but I'm hoping you kind of see a problem like that. If it had gone on for another hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, we were not even 30 minutes in when we kind of got through this. And the guy stood up and said, yeah, that proves the point right there. That would normally been, 3, 4 hour, if not longer, fire call, and everyone at fire drill, everyone's running around, they're like their heads cut off trying to figure out what's going on, major outage. The other one I thought was interesting, and this is going to be my point on IT operation analytics from the end user's perspective. Okay. We were, again, in a proof of concept. This time it was for a bit larger of an organization, and I look at all the data coming in. So I'll talk a little about our solution. Our solution pulls data in real time constantly, so it's more of a data in motion than actually just big data in trending, right? We pull all this data in, and we're taking a look at it and go, there's a lot of malware in your infrastructure. I know it was like high threat, big, huge malware, but there's a lot of low and medium threat malware. And the security guy, they call the security guy up. This is kind of the part I don't like, because this can go one of two ways. The guy can just be like, total denial and be jerk about it, or come and say, that's interesting, look at it. And this guy comes in, he's like, no, that can't be the case, because we've got everything updated, everything running just fine. And as we took a closer look at it, and again, kind of pivoting through this data, moving through this data, right, what we're able to do is take a look at the best and worst performing servers in the environment. And the worst performing server was an antivirus server. But it wasn't worst performing in the fact that it was CPU bound or anything like that. It was just having problems with throughput. But it wasn't getting reported anywhere. I don't know if they had monitors on it or what, but what was happening is their NIC card was actually, or not the NIC card, but the cable was actually that cable going to it. So it was constantly bouncing. And then when we took a look at the actual antivirus signatures, sorry to go a little nerdy and deep here, but they were 2 to 3 weeks out of date. So what that basically meant is they had a big old fire hose sitting on the end of it trying to give them information about security, and it wasn't getting there. And the point when I was talking to the director of IT, I said, here's the important thing. When was the last time your service desk called in and said, or someone called your service desk and said, hey, I didn't get my antivirus signatures today. Whoa, my VPN information wasn't updated today, right? Similar use case, a guy calls in and says, my computer's running slow, and the guy, it was so funny, the guy at the service says, I'm going to hate this guy. He's like, he's my problem child. And he had a whole 30-minute, diatribe about how bad this guy was. And it turns out, when we took a look at the analytics, he just simply had a search, an indexer on his PC, was spinning up, just slamming the CPU, crashing, and it was doing it 4,000 times a day. Right? But think about this. Who's going to sit down at the computer and look at it and see a search indexer crashing? Right? So this guy was really frustrated. He wasn't able to be productive, and yet no one had insight into it. So IT operation analytics starts to give you that type of insight. And we start talking about moving to proactive. We start talking about seeing certain types of return here. That's what we're talking about in this space here. So tickets and incidences have been decreasing by about 35% in the organizations around the size here. Transformation projects, having the right information to actually run a transformation migration project. We're seeing 20% savings. I won't go deep into that unless someone's like, please go deep into that. I will and understand it. The other thing is really again, software, or we talked about that print. Where's print at? Print savings. That one blows me away. When I first got into this, I'm like, no one cares about print. I've literally seen people save hundreds of them. Some large organizations, Paris Fire Department, I think, saved $250,000 the first year. Just by taking, they had print management solution in place, don't get me wrong. But what they weren't taking a look at is how the user's behavior, again, we're talking from the end user's perspective, how the user's behavior was affecting the print solution, right? So they could see how many jobs and what was going on. What they couldn't see is that, certain people were, if we moved printer A, black and white printer here, over to where color printer is over here, that's producing 10 times as much volume, we'd save a lot of money. In other words, the cost of each printer moved to the right area based on the user behavior became a major factor for them. Any questions on this? Okay, here's just a couple of examples. One of the things we're taking a look here as an organization who was able to actually quantify what it takes per incident and had different kind of classifications of cost per incident. And so what we did, talking about proactive and being able to monitor this, again, is we took in all the application crashes happening in the environment. And what was real interesting was we were seeing between 70, and in some cases as much as 95% of incidents out there go unreported. So shadow IT becomes a problem. We won't go into the cost of soft costs and all that kind of stuff there. That all becomes really important. But just by looking at the top 10 crashing applications, right, multiplying it by what they think it costs, you can see how much each order is costing. This is a European country. So you can see right here, they have a total, right now, unresolved, unreported incidences out there of $19,950. Right, does that make sense? Does that kind of make sense what they did? They said, show me everything that's going on past 24 hours. If we actually assign a cost to fixing all that, how much it would take. Now, if we go back to our maturity model, and we start to actually take the analytics a step further and say, you know what? The reason Internet Explorer is crashing is because everyone's on this version of Internet Explorer. So I have better governance in place, and I put everybody else on the same version, the higher quality version, right? I might cut 70% of that out of there. So again, being proactive, and then looking towards automating a response to that. Whenever someone falls out of compliance, you know that their quality is going to go down. It's going to cost you money. That's how you can manage this. This is just one of the customer locations. And here's the kind of last one around hardware rule cost optimization. So again, what we're doing, kind of start getting a little more towards the Nexthink message. Nexthink message here is we put a presence on each one of the endpoints, and then we monitor everything that's happening on that endpoint. We provide visualizations, we provide all this information about what's going on, and it allows us to start to actually take a look at it and say, okay, right now, how does everyone here do hardware? Are you guys on 2-year, 4-year refresh cycles? 5. Yeah. 5-year refresh cycles? That's right, I remember you saying that earlier. So kind of the point here is when you get to that 5 years, you have a choice, right? One is to remove it, but what if you start taking a look at the overall utilization pattern? What if you have that data that says this is a utilization pattern? Instead of just replacing all those PCs, what if 10% of them, 15% of them are only being 50% utilized, 60% utilized? Why would you replace something like that, right? So being able to take that utilization and that analytics information in helps drive better decisions on things like hardware upgrades, helps drive better decisions on software usage, helps drive better decisions on, again, we've talked about some of the use cases, around incident problem management. So, being able to take this whole approach to it, not just the IT operations analytics, but what we're trying to do is move the service desk into a point where they can quantify their impact on the business. I can literally now say, instead of just looking like this black hole cost center where I've got to go start asking for money, I can say, look, we made this investment, and this investment gave us this return, and here's how I can quantify it for you, right? Versus, maybe I'll move some headcount or do these other, calculations up here. We can literally say, last year at this time, I had effectively however many crashes, right? Today at this time, I cut that number in half. And it's not just users calling in. It's actual productivity time that we can quantify. The single biggest number I'm asked for is how much time was a user unable to do something. And I would say a year and a half ago, that was the biggest question I was afraid to ask, because I'd go in there and say, if I can show you how much downtime this costs, or how much downtime this took, right? Would that be useful to you? And CFO would always look at you and go, oh, that's a soft cost conversation. Right? What they would say is, okay, user comes in, PC doesn't work, he goes and gets a cup of coffee for 15 minutes, comes back, it's working, he'll probably work 15 minutes later. Maybe he'll work through a break. There's no way to quantify that. But when you start focusing on transaction-based systems, you start focusing on true productivity, right? There's a huge financial impact. And that's kind of the impact that we want to use IT operation analytics for. In particular, we want to use the information coming from the end user's perspective for to go back to the business and say, look, I've affected your productivity this much. I've affected your X this much. And kind of the last thing, or really for the last thing, again, the idea is we go out and we deploy. And this actually, I want to be clear on one thing. No one really puts in place the full operation analytics solution. You don't just go out and say, chunk of change, come in, deploy your IT operation analytics solution. Okay, there's pieces to this. Splunk fits in a piece, BMC fits into a piece of it, CA has pieces of it, and there's all kinds of other vendors out there that have pieces of this. And I'm just now talking about the one piece that Nexthink does. That's the end user piece, and that's kind of the piece that I happen to be pretty passionate about. And it's this idea that we see everything coming from these endpoints, and we deploy a driver out there. It's a real-time driver. And what it does is the second it gets deployed out there, there's no reaching out to it and talking about what it's supposed to send you. It actually just sends small amounts of data about everything kind of going on in real time. And that information is about all of their PCs, all the users, all the executions and connections. So if you can imagine being able to see everything the PC connected to and what kind of performance it got. What applications they executed, what kind of performance it took. Right? What was installed, what wasn't installed. That's what Nexthink does. It sends all of this information in, turns into operational analytics. The most important thing that we like to show is that it turns into actionable operations analytics. Right off the bat, in every proof of concept we do, we've got actions walking out in day 2, day 3, once that data is done. And we turn that information to something that's consumable by the IT department. Right? So actually, from your frontline employee, running the help desk, taking the first phone call and probably just triaging, then being able to validate whether or not there's a real issue, on up to management so they can understand how the processes are affecting people, and use that information to grow the business. Does have any questions?
Just particularly on the business side of it, when you said it was reducing tickets and 75%, have you, as a follow-up for the actual size of the service desk then, like as this is more implemented, that reducing because the domain has reduced?
There's always talk of that.
Yeah.
I can't think of one where we've gone and they've actually reduced headcount. I can think of ones where they have changed their whole business model though.
Yeah.
So what's happened, what I've seen happen is a lot of some of the larger institutions who are outsourcing, right? They are putting a step in between them and the outsourcer, depending on are they charged by call or how's that SLA written. So I will see some business models change in those relationships on how they're handling data coming in. Because quite simply, it used to be, yep, there's a problem, shove it on them, right? That's all that they would do. And now what they start doing is actually doing quicker, faster looks at the data set and saying, whoa, that's a problem. We'll send it off to them. We can manage that. Here's the right rules. The decision process becomes faster, and that allows them to kind of renegotiate those SLAs and work on agreements. Question? Any other questions?
So it appears that while you do have some product solution, but it seems to be more of a service and implementation oriented because each customer is different. So is that how your service is delivered?
No. Well, is our service delivered? Ask the question again. I'm not sure.
Okay. So the couple of examples you gave, performance issues or any of those. These are very concrete, precise, where somebody needs to actually monitor certain aspects, and maybe your tools need to be pointed in that direction, or you're just looking specifically for issues to resolve those.
Okay, good question. I'll try to do my best to answer. Tell me if I'm going down the right path for you. So what we do, and be specific about it, is we roll out an agent, and each one of those agents is simply statically configured. It sends the same information in no matter what we do. We never reach out to it and say, hey, run this crazy report for me, right? So we send all this information in. We never configure that client. It's deployed. And to be honest with you, even my largest POCs, as long as you've got deployment mechanism, that's an hour or two. Then what we do is we have a server, and it basically sits here and just receives all that information, okay? And all that information gets put into, I don't know, I won't go too deep, but if you're familiar with kind of a big data, what they call ETLing, right? It goes into a in-memory database that behaves like that, okay? So it's very easy to pivot on these big cubes of this data coming in. And so what we end up doing, and where the configuration from your point is identifying, we don't know. Like I can say Outlook, right, is email. I can define a very large service, and I won't get into that too deep because that's actually a fun conversation for me, to be honest with you. But Outlook is a service for just email. How's it performing? And lots of times when I talk about service, the guy goes, oh, it's just the Exchange server. No, email is not just an Exchange server, right? It's DNS, it's Active Directory, it's blah, 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 right? But still, what we need to do is identify on this low level Exchange servers.
Right.
So that's where our configuration comes in.
Right.
Okay.
So that means it's like tailor-made for a specific use case or a specific scenario. Like another example could be a user reports, like whenever accounting accesses the database reports, it's extremely slow. So then if I were to go out and figure this out, I have to tune and the application and point to the specific, like say, database logs or looking at the network on the servers. And
so you play with APM or something like that place too. Okay, so we're a little different than APM. Well, we wouldn't have to tune our tool for it. Once the services are defined, in fact, we can integrate CMDBs. I mean, it just depends on the maturity of the organization usually. Once we're defined there, okay, we can validate. We don't go deep into. We don't go to the transaction set. I guess is what I'm telling you. Okay, so we can go down and say, was it an operating system problem? No. Was it an application? CPU memory performance issue? No. Was it a network issue, or was it network or a one of the protocols? You go all the way down to like layer 4. Okay, that's I'm right. So I can get to that later. But if you really wanted to go in and say, hey, every time Ray clicks on file open, right, or every time this guy runs this transaction, yep, that slows down. We're going to go reindex the database or something like that.
Packet level, you'll be able to snip it and be able to pinpoint the problems.
Right. So we get down to a certain layer, but there's a point in time, like I said, we're the metal detector, right? And we get there, and it's either a ring, we kind of, we know it's a few inches down, we dig with a small shovel, or it's that Titanic, and we need to go get a bunch of equipment to come and fix that problem. So, does that help answer your question? Any other questions? Good questions, by the way. All right, guys, thank you very much. Well, yeah, go ahead.
Well, so how does this work again on cloud systems? So, for example, both my ACD call system and my Remedy are both hosted by the respective vendors. Is your agent, does there need to be a cooperation with the vendor to put that agent on?
Nope. Again, what we're doing is looking at it purely through the eyes of the end users. It's a common question, right? So what we're saying is, I'm just going, you guys are your own monitors, right? And I'm sitting here throwing a ball at you, right? You can't tell how much blood I'm using or oxygen that's coming in to actually find out if the next one's going to hit you as hard, right? But you can tell me how hard it hit you. And that's what we're doing, right? Is we're just putting that on the endpoint and telling you this is what the end user is receiving from that service, right? It would be nice if we get back, or another monitoring service was back on that other back-end system, but we're not. And instead, we're still giving you the power to report on your half of it, right? On how you're receiving that service. So we don't require or install, we don't even really install for most use cases on any back-end systems. We do support virtual desktops. We do support, all kinds of technologies for the endpoint, but we're not going to the server. And the reason we don't go to the servers is the type of data that we report, you don't necessarily want it mixing in with all the end user data. If I have trends coming from a server, they look a whole lot different than trends coming from an endpoint. So even if we do install servers, and it happens and we do it for certain reasons, right? And we segment that data and make sure it's looked at as server data and not as endpoint data. There's just a sheer difference in the type of data that's produced and trends. Answer your question okay? All right, any other questions?